So, like you, actually, I grew up in East London, but again was surrounded by all my friends were pretty much South Asian, and so they were all pretty much South Asian. And it was actually only when I went to university that it was the first time I actually became a minority. And like GCSE art, it was all about identity. And but I guess one thing that always kind of stuck out about me was I was always a bit extra, in the sense I was always involved in extracurricular activities. University was like, standing up for BME officer, lobbying politicians, like you name it, I probably did it. Like, I stood on the 4th plane for Trafalgar Square to raise awareness about Palestine. Like, it was weird, because I think in one way, getting involved in extracurricular activities was like my ticket to freedom, to be like beyond like home and school, to have a bit more of a life, basically. In my final year of university, I was selected to be part of like a youth program run by a very small charity called Spark and Metal. And the lady who set it up, she had just had a baby. And because she had just had a baby, she was based in Brighton. She was an ex-teacher. She wanted to basically help people. So by doing that, what she did was, there was 12 young people. We were on this kind of year-long coaching program. But every week, we would like hang out on Google Hangouts and basically have like an hour call, talking about different soft skills, things like positive relationships, etc. That accidentally led me to found a tech startup, because we basically were like, how do we take this very small program, which was for 12 people, and scale it so that so many more young people can benefit from it. And so we like applied for some funding, and then before we knew it, we created this website, and then we had like 1,000 users, and then before I knew it, we raised investment, and I was like part of like Accelerated and stuff. And that was the first time I was catapulted into like the tech world. And that's when I became very hyper aware of, I guess, even more of my difference. Back then, I think I was only 21, 22. I was brown, I was Muslim, I was young, I was a woman. And then like you're going to these events time and time again, and you're just a bit like, wow, like I am different. And especially when they're like sitting there talking about their skiing holidays as children, you're just like, I cannot relate to this. I was lucky if I went to Brighton or Southend as a child. The startup failed, however. Lots of lessons were learned, but I hired my developer from a company called Makers Academy, which is a 12-week coding bootcamp, which teaches people from like zero skills, turns them to developers and puts them to job. While there, I got very interested around diversity, because we were very focused heavily on trying to get basically women into kind of coding and tech, etc. So this picture was taken when we achieved our first 50-50 cohort. So like 50% of the cohort were women. But again, there was still something that just, it was a really expensive course. It was like $8,000. And so again, I was aware that, okay, cool, we're getting these women in, but a lot of them are actually middle-class white women. What about all the different ethnicities, BME, all that side of things? And I guess by this point, I was maybe 2 or 3 years into the tech world, and I still hadn't seen myself reflected back, never saw like a role model, and I was always just trying to kind of pave the way. So what did I do? What did my co-founder do? He basically, a guy called Murtaza, who's been working in tech too, literally tweeted me saying, hey, I've got this idea, I want to run it past you. I had the same idea, and what we went on to do was set up basically a community called Islamic Makers, which is for Muslims who work in tech. We've been going, alhamdulillah, for 2 years now. We're a community of 800 people, and we basically put a whole range of different events. We've had everything from in conversation style or with like founders that are like Muslim who have like raised funding, etc. We've had like panel discussions around fintech, tech for good. And really for us, the core of all of this was just to actually, that the people coming through can see themselves. Because when you see yourself, you can really kind of, it raises your aspirations and you feel like you can kind of enter the industry. And also at the same time, there was something that was brewing as well, which is the global Islamic economy, which is basically to do with, products that cater for Muslim lifestyle. So there's a lot of stuff in tech. I'm sure you guys all know of Musmatch, Muslim marriage app, which kind of caters for Muslims searching for a spouse, to my friend's startup, Amalia, which is a platform for Muslim women voices. And it was actually when we hosted an event with Nafisa from Amalia and Zora from Halal Gems, which was around women, Muslim women working in tech, that I loved them dearly, but when I was trying to like find my speakers, they were really the only ones I could really reach out to. But when I would type it in on Google, it was like, for some weird reason, I felt like there were more role models like across the pond in America. And in Pakistan, which might be deemed a conservative country, actually a lot of women study STEM subjects there, engineering, etc. So I was at a point in my life where I kind of wanted to throw everything up in the air. So I applied for the Winston Churchill Memorial Trust Fellowship. Bear with me. So what they do is basically fund British citizens to literally research anything. So they give you basically a travel grant, and you go to whatever countries you want to go to. Normally they fund up to about 3 countries, and you bring back best practices. So he kind of set up this whole fund because he felt like he had this opportunity to basically travel and learn from other countries. So I then submitted proposals to them saying, you know, I want to go to America, Pakistan and Dubai. I want to basically bring out role models around Muslim women working in tech, but also see what organizations are doing to work around diversity. So so this like East London girl somehow ended up in Silicon Valley. It was like a total like tech geek. Like, you know, people go and see the Golden Gate Bridge. I mean, I did go do that, but like I was like, oh my God, I get to sign the Facebook wall and I get to do this and I get to do that. Like, it was total like geek heaven for me. So yeah, some examples of, I guess, people that I actually met along my journey. Zaina was one of them. So this girl is, mashallah, like she's only 16 years old, and she set up a all Muslim female STEM robotics club that went on to win like one of the championships in the area and stuff. And she's honestly just 16. I met people like Reshma. Reshma is actually a mother of 6. She's married to like a Cisco guy. In her own right, she's like, you know, used to work in finance, now setting up her own tech startup around parenting, because obviously from her own kind of stuff. And she also invests in startups. And hanging out with her and just even meeting her children and her husband and everyone, like, was just, for me, was finally that moment that I found somebody I could aspire to be like, somebody who was, you know, much more older than me, but who was still very true to their Muslim values, and, you know, was kind of had it all, you know, kind of had the family, but had the career and all things kind of going for her. Them two are just an example of a whole bunch of women that I met along the way in America. You know, women working at Twitter, Google, doing startups, like, you name it, like, I met them. And what I did was basically capture their stories through kind of videos. And just some examples of really interesting, I guess, diversity initiatives that I also kind of came across as well. So, you know, this is the British Islam Conference, and actually one of the mosques I stumbled across in DC, Washington, was basically like, this is from Qadr of Allah. I just went to visit the mosque. You know, it's a beautiful mosque, and they were teaching kids HTML, CSS, and coding. And for me, I was just like, whoa, like, God wanted me to see this. And it really, like, you know, I guess it's the whole thing about how mosques should be like beyond prayer spaces, right? They should be for the community. They should be getting the youth ready for the future. And when I kind of, this is something that I'm still sitting on. Like, I'm hoping to do more stuff with Islamic makers in the future around running workshops in mosques. But like, this for me was just like mind-blowing, even though it's such a just simple thing to do. Oh, and actually what was really cool actually was one of the instructor guys, what I really loved was when he was, in one of the classes I sat in, they were talking about data statistics, and he was basically relating it back to Islam. So he was talking about how like good deeds and bad deeds are like statistics. And just the way he kind of went about kind of doing it as well, I just really, really kind of liked it. Then Pakistan. Pakistan was interesting. I am from a Pakistani background, and I went after 7 years. So going after 7 years, 2, going actually for the first time and seeing it from a professional lens and not literally going in the family bubble that you go all the time, really changed my whole opinion of Pakistan. Like, I'm like, so like, I've always had a love-hate relationship with that country, and like right now it's like, I'm like on a really love phase right now, because I just kind of saw so much potential and I saw so much positivity. So this picture was taken at a game studio called Caramel Tech Game Studio, and these women are just working within the company, but they were singing praises about their boss, who is a guy. And again, like a lot of my assumptions and stereotypes were kind of challenged and changed about Pakistani men or whatever, you know. And so like here at the game studio, you know, they're engineers, they're like video games designers, they're kind of all sorts as well. I spent 4 days at Arfah Technology Park. I guess they knew I was coming, so they named it after me. No, it was named after a 9-year-old, actually, who unfortunately passed away, but she was the youngest certified professional, Microsoft certified professional. Sorry, I've got a bit of a cold. Okay, so in the technology park, this is actually run by the government. One of the programs that they have there is herself. So this is what I think is really interesting, because one size doesn't fit all, and the Pakistani government recognizes that actually a lot of time women do get educated, and but actually they don't actually enter the work field. So we've got all this kind of, I guess, talent drain, if you want to call it, brain drain. And they're like, okay, how do we get them like ready for like the world of work? And what they're trying to do is basically get them like freelancing online, where they can work from home, getting them to set up businesses, kind of recognizing the, you know, the responsibilities that also kind of come with that too. This was another software house. So Venture Dive basically runs Career Map, which is the equivalent of Uber in the region. And there were a couple of cool things about the software house. So one was actually all the women in the company actually get free cab rides to and from work. So it's a very subtle thing, a very, very small thing, but it's a massive empowering thing in terms of actually getting women to work, so their parents and husbands and brothers and whatever like don't have to kind of worry about that side of things. The other thing as well was just a third of the company were women, which actually, to be honest, is better than a lot of tech statistics of tech companies here in the UK and the Western world. And I guess a third one, again, my unconscious biases were challenged, especially when she walked in, and Niqabi lady, because I don't know where it came from, but I was like, what is she doing here? But like it was, and I had the most awesome conversation with her. She works as a software engineer and stuff. And again, I think often when you think of Pakistan and you kind of associate it with like so much negativity that like all these kind of things kind of seep into your brain. And I'm a Pakistani, you know, so just think about kind of what the other world, the actual like other people kind of thing. So these stories kind of really kind of helped. Another interesting statistic is actually how in the Gulf region, so like Gulf, UAE and stuff, 60% of actually engineering students are women, which is actually double what we have in the Western world. So, you know, everyone kind of thinks that the West is ahead and blah-de-da-de-da, but actually there's a lot happening in these kind of developing kind of regions. So as I mentioned, so what I did with my fellowship is, rather than actually doing a 50-page report, I decided to kind of create a Facebook page, use social media, and basically just create tons of video content. I'm still in the process of like editing all my content from Pakistan, and I haven't even touched Dubai yet. So, you know, there's like interviews, there's like vlogs, there's like all the kind of different kind of things I experienced where, in a sense, for me, it was all about just telling that story. Telling that story, I think, especially with Pakistan, it was around that positivity, actually, that I experienced in terms of actually progressive Pakistan, if you want to call it. But also it was about the women I met, and even the men, actually. And I feel like it's very important to include men in that conversation when it comes to diversity and empowering. A few little things that I picked up. A career in technology was often an accident for women in the West, including my own story. It was something that I just kind of fell into. As I mentioned, one size doesn't fit all. We can't take the women in tech Western agenda and then try and plot it in Pakistan or plot it in India, wherever. Like, they've got their own cultural dynamics, and you kind of have to navigate in a slightly different way into when it comes to empowerment. This one was something one of the girls actually said to me. Don't fight with culture or family, but instead engage with them. So this picture was taken when I did my first tech startup, and I invited my parents along to the pitching event, because one, like, parents aren't going to get this stuff. You kind of just have to sometimes show them. They have to sometimes see you in action. And that can really kind of change things up, and I feel it totally did for me as well. But also I think like it's just important to have that conversation. You know, if you're parents or if you're a kid or like whatever you are, like relationship you have in your life, actually like don't fight with your culture, actually engage with your parents, engage with your family. That stuff just kind of changes. Some of the women were married and supportive partners is kind of a no-brainer really. Sheryl Sandberg has this quote about how the most important career choice you make is who you marry. Sheryl Sandberg is the coup of Facebook, because yeah, especially the women that were married, you know, I think a lot of the time they were able to do a lot of things, you know, even if that is like traveling across the world, mentoring a startup in Gaza, for example. They were able to do that because the husband was willing to step up and kind of look after the children for the 2 weeks, etc. And yeah, I guess like really, I think for me, when I was at Makers Academy, I was the first kind of minority person in this kind of tech startup that was training people. And I'm a fairly confident person, so for me to bust out a prayer mat on the first date isn't an issue. But for a lot of people, there will be a lot of hesitation. So I feel like that one little thing I did opened up a whole conversation for them, because then on the first staff meeting, they were like, oh, should we like think about having a private space for you, or etc. And mind you, as a startup, there wasn't much space. It was still, I was like, no, it's fine, I just need a corner. But you know, once we moved into a new building, and then recently they acquired a new floor, they actually really thought about, okay, we need to put a well-being space, a meditation, a prayer space. So like, it doesn't matter for me anyways, it doesn't matter I think what industry you're going in. Like actually, people say the onus shouldn't be on you, but I think you make it so much easier for the people that follow if you just fight a tiny bit in the beginning. It's not even about fighting, it's just about educating. Yeah, as you mentioned, relatable role models, I think that goes for any kind of industry. And I think it was only once I saw a lot of these women working in places like Google and Facebook and Twitter that I felt like, oh, I could do that too, you know? And not have to sacrifice who I am or my values in the process. And I guess just other things really, it doesn't matter who you are, you can always champion the unrepresented. It doesn't have to be a whole song and dance videos like I do. It can be as simple as a tweet, you know, simply just mentioning somebody's work or whatever it is, because you don't know who's watching and like how opportunities, etc. follow. And this applies to everyone. I think it's really important to diversify your networks. So, yep, that's it. Thank you very much.